Now,
Uh,
I'm not going to do an introduction here because we'll have a nice slide giving you your profile, etc. All right. Now, well, let's start on a, I don't know, how would you describe the note, but looking at what's been happening in the last few days and further back, when you look at Trump, do you cry or laugh?
Both. I mean, certainly there's plenty of room for tears, both in his foreign policy, which is very mercurial. He contradicts himself. He gives the impression of not really understanding the issues. He's interested in high personal profile in the media and thinks of, he really extends his performative role in The Apprentice, which gave him a certain media profile into his discharge of the functions of the presidency. And so he thinks of it as performative. There's even speculation that the U.S. entry into the attack on Iran was prompted by the fact that the Israeli attack got lots of favorable international media coverage as a job well done. And so he wanted to get in on the act and sort of treated it as a theater performance. And he's completely without empathy, as far as can be told, in at least in his public roles, and the treatment of American protesters and particularly the student and faculty who take strong stands on Palestine, and the way they have managed the deportation of undocumented immigrants, many of whom have been here for a long time with families and have had admirable profiles as in their work and in their family life and in everything that counts, and yet they're treated as criminals and sent off to places that they have no contact with. It's really a kind of civic barbarism that
Mm,
is manifested in this
mm,
reversal of the American treatment of supposedly needy people from around the world, epitomized by the Statue of Liberty that is supposed to greet foreign visitors and makes a mockery of the famous Franklin Roosevelt greeting to the Democratic Party, fellow immigrants. He famously said that back in the 1930s. So it's a
but he
very
gets around that by saying they're robbers and murderers, doesn't he?
yes, and rapists
Yeah, that's right. Forgot about the rapists.
and they're drug users.
That's right. That's right. If we just for a moment turn to Israel, we'll come back to the US, but Israel, Iran, Gaza, does it have two separate agendas or are its actions part of one, both of them part of one agenda?
Well, I think for Netanyahu and uh, Israel, they both are connected and they are distinct strategic objectives. In Gaza and secondarily in the West Bank, the objective is to consolidate sufficient Israeli control as to incorporate those Palestinian territories into a sovereign one state Israel that is a Jewish supremacist state and is then the foundation for proclaiming that the conflict with Palestinians has been overcome and that there is a one state solution prefigured in the pre Netanyahu period in the 2018 Basic Law, which the Knesset adopted and more or less said that only Jews have a right of self-determination within Palestine and seemed to assimilate the settlers in the West Bank into that conception of a single Jewish-dominated
Mhm.
polity that civil society respected human rights organizations have, for the last 5 or 6 years, uniformly concluded is an apartheid regime.
Mhm.
And so the pattern of moving from apartheid to genocide is a characteristic of the settler colonial project when it faces resistance and can't solve those problems by either creating a kind of Bantustan for the displaced people or forcing them out, as it did substantially in the Nakba back in 1948.
Yes.
So
So, if I may just ask, how does all this agenda that you've been spelling out, fit? That where does Iran fit in all of this?
Iran, that's why I say it's partly Iran helped Israel shift attention away from a rising volume of criticism of what Israel was doing, especially with respect to humanitarian assistance in Gaza and the West Bank. And so it successfully more or less silenced the world on Israel's approach to the problems of the Palestinian territories. So it achieved inattention. It was, and Israel all along has pursued what I call the politics of deflection, getting you to think of something else rather than their own criminality. And that's part of how they've used the weaponization of anti-Semitism against critics who have no genuine animosity toward Jews and are critics of either the ideology of Zionism or the state of Israel and the policies it's pursuing. Jeremy Corbyn being a prime example of someone who they successfully destroyed as a political, credible candidate to be the UK leader.
Yes, yes. And
They
there are
drew the
other such cases, even, and you are another example as well. The
Well, a minor example, Francesca Albanese, the current special rapporteur of the UN, is an important example and
yeah.
fearless. She's been fearless. And
Richard, you're suggesting that the actions in relation to Iran are basically an offshoot of the wider Palestinian strategy. Am I
no,
reading you right?
I only meant to say that was one of the motivations and may explain the timing of the
Uh-huh.
attack.
But
The
there's
real,
more to the Iran conflict than that.
yeah, yeah. Oh, there's more to it. There's some um, motivation around being the only Middle Eastern power to have a nuclear weapons capability. And no one talks about that. No governments. And I've been surprised Iran doesn't say, we'll pledge everything if Israel gives up its arsenal of
Yes,
weapons.
exactly. Yes.
They have 300 to 400 nuclear warheads, apparently. And, uh, and so, but the underlying strategic objective of Israel is to be sure that no unfriendly regime governs a coherent country with a capability to challenge Israel. Their treatment of Lebanon, Syria, and now Iran and Iraq
Yeah.
all have been aiming at a regional uh, uh, hegemonic control in partnership with the U.S. and um, and deliberately outlined when Netanyahu was out of power with a group of radical Zionists headed by Richard Pearl, former student of mine, who devised this idea of clean break. And it was to see to it that the potentially and actually hostile governing bodies in the regional setting were either friendly or replaced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's that the regional strategy that is at play in Iran. And Iran was always the potentially main target of this policy.
And
But it's
presumably remains so. Hmm?
yeah, and it engendered some caution because it's a country of 90 million, and it has built up uh, some long-range military capabilities, which have been on display these last couple of weeks. Uh, and so it wanted always to get the U.S. To join it. It didn't want to be exposed to a bilateral kind of confrontation with Iran, unlike the other targets that it's attacked in the recent past.
So, Richard, now that at least for the moment, we have a ceasefire there, will the attention turn back on Gaza?
I think so, and the Israeli chief of staff, I think it was, made a statement saying, we're not through with Iran at this point, but in the near future, our attention will be again devoted to Gaza. And they want the forced um, displacement or ethnic cleansing of as many Palestinians as they can induce to leave and induce other places to accept as presumably refugees. And
In
that's
that, we're back to where we were before this Iranian this Iranian Israeli eruption of the conflict between them. Uh, is there any light at the end of the tunnel so far as Gaza and Palestine more generally is concerned?
well, there's only the light that there's a little bit of suggestion that Israel hasn't been sufficiently subservient to the US, that it has angered Trump, and there's the possibility that he will put a lot of pressure on Netanyahu and Israel to end the genocidal assault on Gaza and the West Bank.
In relation to that, I've heard a suggested explanation of why Trump did what he did in relation to the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, that he did it in order to be able to claim, rightly or wrongly, that Iran's nuclear capability had been effectively wiped out. And then he could put pressure on Israel to say, well, your main goal is achieved. Now I want you to stop. Full stop. I want you to stop, and no discussion will be entered into. You will stop. Might he,
Yeah,
are you suggesting he might do something a little bit equivalent when it comes to Gaza?
yes, it's hard to know because Washington is so dominated by a bipartisan consensus of unconditional support for Israel that seems to be frayed, but still the dominant political expression. And whether he's prepared to uh, override that consensus remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and as I tried to indicate at the outset, he's so unpredictable and so subject to an impressionable influences that it's really reckless to anticipate any rational follow-up or to anticipate what he might do. I
Yeah,
just think it's
fair enough. But looking back and thinking of the Biden administration before him, when it comes to Israel, US, who calls the shots?
uh, I think in the Biden period, there was no question that Israel was calling the shots. Biden made gestures at various points of trying to restrain the attacks on civilians, though he never followed through. He had made Rafah a safe zone and warned Israel not to extend their military operation to Rafah, but they completely ignored him and he did nothing. He did the same thing with delaying some of the more heavy munitions to Israel, but again, he tempered that, and it made no real impact. And at the same time, it sort of angered the Israelis because he didn't co come across as an unconditional supporter at the end. I mean, now with this humanitarian crisis, it's a good moment for Trump to say this and to portray himself as a kind of peacemaker and humanitarian, and maybe with an crazy eye on the possibility of a Nobel Peace Prize, bringing the conflict to an end.
Two
I mean,
American presidents, Nobel Peace Prize winners, it would be too much.
yeah, much too much. And he, whatever else he is, he's a kind of symbol of imperial and militarist thinking of the most regressive kind.
Mm,
And
mm,
one shouldn't forget that. I mean, he had the good sense to pledge that not to enter so-called forever wars of the Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya sort, and regime
and
change.
Syria.
Yeah, in, and he lifted the sanctions from Syria. I don't. It's very hard to uh, depict any kind of coherent.
You may be asking too much. Coherence.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
asking. I mean, and he's very much an opponent of truth-based thinking. I mean, he almost as a implicit creed relies on intuitive,
Yeah.
belief-grounded
Mm.
uh, reactions
Yes.
and
Based on his very extensive knowledge of the situations he's dealing
yeah,
with.
yeah.
Well,
I mean,
let's focus back on Palestine, if I may, Richard, because that's, a great concern. Um, where can Palestinians realistically expect support from as of now, and Gazans in particular?
I think that there's no easy answer to that. The Arab governments in the region, especially the Gulf countries and Egypt, have been very disappointing in their failure to exhibit the solidarity that their people want. Uh, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia uh, was quoted recently as saying, "I don't care about Palestine, but my people do." And he was explaining that for that reason, they don't have to do anything, but they have to pretend to do. They have to pretend to be condemning Israel. But I think they're scared of Hamas from their own point of view,
Mm.
from the point of view of regime stability and legitimacy. And they've they have reason to think that some people have speculated that there might be a second Arab Spring that turned in the direction of solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And there would be great international sympathy for that. And I think there is a growing civil society antagonism toward Israel. Israel is now put itself in the position of being a rogue state, probably the most serious instance since at least racist South Africa. And in a way, it has generated this new wave of anti-Semitism around the world. I've been saying that Netanyahu is the worst thing for the Jews since Hitler. And I think that's not an exaggeration.
Now, I know, Richard, that you've been very involved with the Gaza Tribunal. Tell us a little about that and what your expectations or hopes by the time it comes to a conclusion later in the year.
Well, it starts out of the frustration with the global normative order centered in the UN that has not been able to stop the genocide over a period that now is more than 20 months. And even though its institutions have in some ways said the right things or gone in the right directions, both the General Assembly and the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, but there's an enforcement gap. So they have no capabilities to enforce their own decisions, and they're dependent on the Security Council, which in turn is subject to the veto of the five winning powers in World War II. And it exposes the UN as an institution not so much of war prevention, but of a designed structure that was equipped to preserve the domination of the winners of the war.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be no other reason to give the veto to the five most powerful and dangerous countries, the first five countries to acquire nuclear weapons. They would be the last, if you were really prioritizing war prevention and global security, they would be the last recipients of a capability to block action by the UN. And so we have to look toward the empowerment of the General Assembly and a kind of radical reform of the UN, and that may come about. Then there's also this issue of impunity for complicit actors. There's no prospect that there will be any accountability for the countries that helped Israel carry out the genocide. And so there's what I call an accountability gap that follows from the complicity and is parallel to the enforcement gap. And
And
so,
who would you regard as the main candidates in complicity?
well, the overwhelmingly significant one is the US, unfortunately, and but the ex-colonial powers in Europe, France and the UK and Germany, all have been complicit. The white breakaway British colonies, North America, Canada and the US, Australia, New Zealand,
Mm-hmm.
have, and so you have what I've called in the past this second coming of Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilization dimension to what Israel is doing. Some have called it saying that Israel is doing the dirty work of the West by what it's been doing with Islamic groups like Hezbollah and
Yeah.
the other antagonist, the Houthis and Iran, of course.
Mm. And the tribunal in all of this?
And the tribunal takes over the view that given this failure of the formal system, it's only the people of the world that have the potential agency to shift the balance of forces around these issues. And it's to encourage solidarity activism, especially of a nonviolent sort, and to reaffirm the Palestinian right of resistance that is part of international law, and especially in the context of colonialism or settler colonialism. And to document that kind of understanding and to stimulate a activist surge in civil society. We had a public session in Sarajevo recently, which had very many moving and compelling reports, and ended with a Sarajevo declaration that has now been widely disseminated, and we're trying to get groups and individuals to endorse it and to share it. And I hope that SHAPE will be one of those that will enter that process. We've
And
been,
what's ahead for the tribunal?
and the ahead for the tribunal essentially is to compose a archive based on the evidence at its disposal, and to have a second final public session in Istanbul in October that will feature a jury of conscience with prominent individuals from around the world.
And all of this keeps you very busy, doesn't it?
Too busy.
Well, yes. What were you going to say, Richard?
Oh, I was going to say it at my age, it's been a burden that exceeds my capacities.
But I think what you do exceeds also the actual conduct of many people half your age or even 1/4 of your age. So we're very indebted to you for sharing your insights accumulated over a long period of time, and for your continuing interests and efforts to make the world a bit of a more just and saner place. So thank you very much for sharing your time with you, and we will keep in touch.
Definitely. And thank you for having me as a guest. And I enjoyed, as always, a stimulating conversation with you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Richard. All the
Bye-bye.
best. Bye.
Yes. See you soon.
Absolutely.